I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Mervat Matar, Professor of Internal Medicine and Hematology at the Faculty of Medicine, Cairo University. Dr. Matar is our very experienced adult hematologist who receives the patients when they grow up. We deal with the kids only. And Dr. Mervat is going to talk about Egyptian Adult Thalassemia Center of Excellence 3 years on.
Thank you, Dr. Lamis, and I thank my professor, Dr. Amal Bishlawi, for allowing me to be part of this very important meeting. And I thank Dr. Mabed for being as a chairperson in this talk. I have to point out that before 2017, thalassemic patients were reviewed in the adult clinical hematology unit, but as part of all hematology, not as separate entities, not as special care. But as of 2017, we started the Kafr Al-Aini Adult Thalassemia Center of Excellence with the help and the gracious help of Dr. Amal Bishlawi, Dr. Ilham Yusri, Dr. Mona Al-Ghamrawi, Dr. Mona Tagi, of course Dr. Lamis, and they helped us a lot. They channeled the patients reaching adulthood to our center, and we try to copy them. We try to be as successful as they are, not yet there, but hopefully we are trying. So this was our first inauguration of the center. And as you all know, a thalassemia center has to be a multidisciplinary center, as Dr. Ayatar has just mentioned. You have to meet all the requirements of the patient, and you have to deal with other disciplines, including lab, which I thank Dr. Hala Farawila for helping me out, and of course the blood bank and others. I'm going to give you the results of 2018. From 2017 to 2018, we included 130 cases of adult thalassemia. 84 cases were major, 24 were intermediate, and 20 cases were minor cases. 91 cases were splenectomized with an average age of splenectomy as young as 9 years of age. 30 cases had splenomegaly, and 9 cases had no splenomegaly. HCV status, of course, we do know that we have a prevalence of hepatitis C, and so 20 cases out of 130 were hepatitis C positive by PCR. Of course, I have to point out that we now are having a project with the Department of Tropical Medicine, because these patients are now being treated for hepatitis C by the new oral antiviral agents. Regarding transfusion and monitoring iron overload status, this is our center here. It is an outpatient center, just like Abu Rish. We looked at the guidelines for choosing how much blood to transfuse, and as you can see, there's a target increase in hemoglobin level, and there is you can look at how we can transfuse to patients. And among 130 Egyptian patients, 86 patients were transfusion dependent, while 44 were non-transfusion dependent cases. The mean ferritin level was 2023. These patients were not properly chelated. They were not very well cared for. They did not care about themselves. Usually patients, when they are children, the mother and father, they really take care of the patient. But once you grow up, they forget, especially if they are not non-transfusion dependent. And they stop following up, they stop taking the medication, and they do not care while the ferritin is high. They only show up when the patient is pregnant, when he is having a surgery, or when there is a problem. If not, they do not follow up regularly. And this was a challenge for us that we tried to address. Among 130 cases, 100 cases required chelation, while 30 cases did not require chelation. They just required follow-up. I have to point out that the ferritin level in our center needs to be normal. So we do not go below 1,000, we do not go below 800, but we go to normal ferritin levels, and we try to take care of that. We do not only use serum ferritin levels, but we are also starting the MRI T2 star project, and we have already enrolled 40 cases doing the MRI T2 star as much as possible. This is not covered by the Ministry of Health, but we do them for free with the help of a certain pharmaceutical company. We try also to give cardiac assessment to our patients, and we included all our patients regarding MRI T2 star, but we also included 35 Egyptian adult thalassemia patients for the time being, comparing echocardiography findings versus MRI T2 star findings. And as you can see, compliant patients have normal T2 star and results, and they have normal end-diastolic function versus the non-compliant patients, and this was statistically significant. And as you can see here, as you have more and more iron overload, you get more and more diastolic dysfunction by echocardiography. These are adult patients. So adult patients can have still atherosclerosis, they can have still hypertension and diabetes mellitus. So an end-diastolic function, even though mild problem in dysfunction, still is a problem for these patients. So we need to take care of the patients. We need to point out the fact that iron overload is a hazard for them, maybe on the long run. We tried also to do endocrinal assessment to these patients, and as you can see, published in 2004, hypogonadism, short stature, glycemic abnormalities, hypoparathyroidism, and hypothyroidism were all reported with different incidences in cases of thalassemia. And we tried to look at hypogonadism, especially amenorrhea, primary and secondary, assessment of infertility. We tried also to assess growth. We also tried to assess the diabetic status. We tried to assess the thyroid and the hypo and the parathyroid function. And I have to point out that we looked at pregnancy very much, because many of the patients, they just show up when they are pregnant and immediately after labor. But if the patient is not pregnant, probably she is going to miss her follow-up visits until she becomes pregnant again. And we try to convince them that they have to space out pregnancies, and that their pregnancies should be planned, and that we should follow them up, especially all through during pregnancy and during labor. And we have some joint projects with OBGYN, that patients that are thalassemic, we plan for their labor, how they are going to give labor, will it be a cesarean section, a planned cesarean section, and so on. As I said, we looked at these, and among 58 adult thalassemic patients for the time being, we found hypogonadism, we found short stature, we found glycemic abnormalities, and hypoparathyroidism and hypothyroidism to a lesser extent. Hypogonadism was found in 57% out of 58 cases. This is a problem. Short stature in 58% of the cases. Subclinical hypothyroidism 3.9%. Diabetes mellitus in 3%. Hypoparathyroidism in 5.8%. So they are really suffering, but they really do not know, and they do not care. And this is our role. We point out that they need to be very well kept, so that they can marry, they can get, well, they can live a normal life. We also looked at osteoporosis by DEXA scans. We screened for osteoporosis, and out of 138 cases, 58 cases had a DEXA screening, 17% only were normal, 47% were osteopenic, 10% were osteoporotic, 26% had severe osteoporosis and fracture risk. So more than a quarter of our cases had severe osteoporosis and fracture risk. This is a real problem, and we are dealing with our very special endocrinologist to take care of these patients. She attends the thalassemia clinic weekly to take care of these patients, so that the bones are preserved as much as possible. And this is a real problem in adults. It will not show in children, but it definitely shows in adults, especially as they grow older and older. Regarding the choice of proper iron chelation, the total cases receiving chelation were 100 out of the 130. 48 cases, that is 54%, were receiving deferazirox, 35% were receiving deferiprone, and 11% were still receiving the deferoxamine. How about compliance? We did compliance tests in 100 patients. 70 cases were compliant, but around 18 cases were not compliant. The others were missed to follow up, so I do not know if they were compliant or not. And so we stressed education. And we are now giving adult thalassemia gathering every now and then. As you can see, الحقيقة في الطل, because we have no big place to control them, but we have a nice open area in front of our clinic, and so we gather them every now and then, and we try to health educate them, to make them feel what is the importance of transfusion, follow-up, chelation, regular tests that are being done to them, and that even though they are receiving the chelation, still they need to be followed up. This is Dr. Rasha. She is one of our major thalassemia specialists. We also looked into quality of life among these cases, and among 85 other thalassemia patients, we looked at quality of life, choosing many scales of quality of life. As you can see, the SF336, the EQ5D3L, and the VAS. Now, different aspects are being addressed by different parameters, either emotional and well-being, social function, pain, or mobility, self-care, activity, again pain, anxiety, or a total. And every one of these parameters, you have a total number score. And this score is normal in many, has a normal figure, and it can be abnormal in these patients. Let us look at them. Well, males versus females. Females fared worse regarding well-being and fatigue. All of these cases had quality of life problems, but it was females rather than males that suffered more. As you can see, more fatigue was felt by females. Less well-being was felt by females rather than males. Regarding the type of thalassemia, it really did not differ whether the patients were transfusion dependent or non-transfusion dependent. The problem was equal. It only differed regarding liver functions. When the liver functions were high, well-being was worse. When they were normal, well-being was better. And it differed regarding ferritin level. Patients with uncontrolled ferritin levels fared worse in their well-being status and in their quality of life status, versus patients that were well controlled, the quality of life was definitely better. As you can see here, we are comparing physical function and pain with patients that had ferritin level less than 1,000 and the patients that had ferritin level more than 1,000. And as you can see, patients that had higher ferritin had bad physical function and more pains. Also, we looked at the type of chelator regarding social function. And as you can see, patients that were on injectable iron chelation, they had poor social function. And so oral chelation gave better quality of life in our patients. There was no difference between one type of oral chelation and the other. And until now, we do not have the new dispersible oral iron chelator. But regarding injectable, they always fared worse regarding the quality of life. And also with compliance, patients that were compliant to treatment had a better quality of life rather than patients that were not compliant to treatment. How about patients that were splenectomized? Well, quality of life was worse in patients that were splenectomized versus patients that were not splenectomized, especially as they grew older. I really do not know why. Probably because higher platelet count, higher white cell count, and this might affect the patient one way or another. But what I can say is that patients that were splenectomized probably had a worse type of thalassemia. That's why they were splenectomized early. That's why their quality of life is worse. Regarding CBC parameters, of course, we all know that when the hemoglobin was higher in these patients, the higher the hemoglobin, the better the quality of life. This is to be expected. But look at the curve on the left. The higher the white cell count, the worse the quality of life. Why? I do not know. But still, it was an observation in these patients. I thank you for your patience, but all for your patience. And I thank Dr. Ali Taher because he helped us with preceptorship with our young thalassemia specialists. And I thank my team for all this work. And I promise you that maybe next year we are going to double this or maybe triple these patients and maybe with more results. I have to point out with Dr. Ali Taher that we have had a few patients with cancer and thalassemia. And there was one patient, he was 25 years old, he had transfusion-dependent thalassemia. His hemoglobin was always around 8 or 8.5, and then he experienced non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. His hemoglobin grew better on chemoimmunotherapy, and the hemoglobin rose. I was very much afraid to give chemotherapy and immunotherapy to this patient, but I noticed that he needed less blood, and after being cured of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, now his hemoglobin is safe on 10.5 grams per deciliter of transfusion, and I really do not know why. With that, I thank you.